I'm David, 32 male. I work as an architect, a profession built on precision, structure, and the belief that a solid foundation is everything. My life until recently felt much the same way, meticulously planned and happily shared with my wife Sarah in a home we designed together. But in a single afternoon, I discovered that the foundation of my own family was built on nothing but sand, ready to be washed away by a tide of resentment I never saw coming. This is the story of how my parents' final act of betrayal, meant to ruin me, inadvertently gave me the blueprint to reclaim my life and expose the rot at the core of my family. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The air in Mr. Caldwell's office was stale, thick with the scent of old paper and furniture polish. It was the kind of oppressive silence that presses down on you, making each breath feel like an effort. I sat on a stiff leather chair, my hand gripping Sarah's so tightly that my knuckles were white. Across the polished mahogany desk, my younger brother, Mark, sat perfectly composed in a tailored suit, his expression a careful mask of solemnity. He was always good at playing the part. I, on the other hand, felt like a raw, exposed nerve. Our parents, Robert and Alina, had passed away 2 weeks prior in a sudden car accident, and the shock had not yet receded. It was a dull, persistent ache in my chest, a constant reminder of the finality of it all. Mr. Caldwell, a man with a kind but professionally distant face, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice calm and measured. "We are here today to read the last will and testament of Robert and Alina Patterson. I was their estate lawyer for the past decade, and the document before me was finalized 18 months ago." 18 months? The date struck me like a physical blow. That was just after Sarah and I got married. My parents had made their disapproval of Sarah abundantly clear from the moment I introduced her. She wasn't from a respectable family of doctors or lawyers. She was a freelance photographer and artist, which in my father's eyes was one step above being unemployed. My mother, a retired school principal, saw her as lacking the proper discipline and ambition. They wanted me to marry someone who would fit neatly into their meticulously curated world, someone who would add to the family's perceived prestige. Sarah, with her independent spirit and creative soul, was the antithesis of their ideal. Their reaction to our engagement was cold, and their attendance at our wedding felt more like a duty than a celebration. They smiled for the photos, but their eyes were like ice. After the wedding, our conversations became strained, their calls less frequent. I had hoped, naively, that time would soften their stance, that seeing how happy Sarah made me would eventually win them over. "I will now read the pertinent sections," Mr. Caldwell continued, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. He unfolded the document, the crisp crackle of the paper echoing in the silent room. "I, Robert Patterson, and I, Alina Patterson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be our last will and testament." He read through the standard legal jargon, the formal language a stark contrast to the emotional devastation it was about to unleash. He detailed a few small bequests, a piece of jewelry for a cousin, a donation to their favorite charity. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety. Then he arrived at the main clause. "Regarding our estate, including the family home located at 125 Chestnut Lane, all financial accounts, investments, and personal property, we bequeath the entirety of our assets to our beloved son, Mark Patterson." The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. I felt the blood drain from my face. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened, her nails digging into my palm, grounding me. I looked at Mark, and for a fleeting second his mask of grief slipped. I saw a flicker of something else, triumph. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a look of practiced surprise. Mr. Caldwell wasn't finished. He took a slow breath, as if steeling himself for the final, cruelest cut. "A specific provision has been made concerning our elder son, David Patterson." He paused, and his eyes met mine with a hint of pity. "To our son, David, we leave the sum of $1. This decision was made with a heavy heart but a clear mind. His choice to marry outside the values we instilled in him and to disregard our guidance for his future has been a source of profound disappointment. We hope this action impresses upon him the gravity of his decisions and the importance of family loyalty." $1, it wasn't about the money, it was a stat. It meant a final, posthumous slap in the face. It was their way of saying my entire life, my happiness, my love for Sarah, was worth less than a piece of pocket change. The numbness that had enveloped me since their deaths was pierced by a white-hot spear of pain and betrayal. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was closing in, the polished walls suffocating me. I had known they were disappointed, but I never imagined their disappointment was a chasm so deep it could swallow 32 years of my life. They hadn't just disinherited me, they had tried to erase me. They had invalidated my marriage, my choices, and my very identity as their son. Mark was the first to speak, his voice laced with a perfect blend of sorrow and shock. I had no idea, he stammered, shaking his head as he looked at me. David, I'm so sorry. This is unbelievable. I never would have thought they would do something so drastic. But his eyes told a different story. There was no surprise there, only the cool, calculated gaze of someone who had known this was coming all along. He had always been the golden child, the one who followed their path without question. He went to the right law school, joined the right firm, and dated the right kind of women. He was their perfect son, and I was the disappointment. I couldn't find my voice. What was there to say? My own parents had written me out of their lives, and my brother was now the sole heir to a legacy I had once thought we would share. I felt Sarah gently tugging on my arm. David, she whispered, her voice a lifeline in the suffocating silence. Let's go, we don't have to stay here. I rose from the chair on unsteady legs, my body feeling disconnected from my mind. I didn't look at Mark. I couldn't. I just stared at the single-dollar coin Mr. Caldwell had placed on the desk, a small silver monument to my parents' final judgment. It was the ultimate insult, a meticulously planned act of cruelty designed to be delivered after they were gone, leaving me with no one to confront, no one to rage at but their ghosts. As we walked out of that office and into the cold, indifferent afternoon, I felt a profound and chilling emptiness. My family, as I had known it, was gone. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had put a price on their affection, and I had failed to pay it. The betrayal was absolute, leaving a wound far deeper than any financial loss ever could. The days that followed the will reading were a blur of hollow conversations and sleepless nights. Sarah was my rock, her presence a constant, silent support that kept me from completely falling apart. She never once said, "I told you so," though she would have been justified. She had seen the coldness in my parents' eyes long before I was willing to admit it was there. Instead, she just held me when the anger and grief became too much, and she made sure I ate when the thought of food was repulsive. We existed in a bubble of shared shock, the world outside continuing on as if my personal cataclysm hadn't happened. My brother Mark, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of activity. He called me the day after the reading, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Dave, I'm still in shock," he said, his tone perfectly calibrated. "I've been talking to Mr. Caldwell, trying to see if there's anything we can do. I want to make this right. We can split everything, of course. 50-50, just like we always assumed it would be." His offer sounded generous on the surface, but I knew my brother. Every word he spoke was a carefully calculated move on a chessboard I was only just beginning to understand. He was a corporate lawyer. He lived in breathed contracts, loopholes, and leverage. A simple handshake deal meant nothing. He was testing my reaction, gauging my emotional state. "Why, Mark?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion churning inside me. "Why would they do this?" He sighed dramatically into the phone. "You know how they were, traditional, they just couldn't get past, you know." He left the rest unsaid, letting the insult hang in the air. He was blaming Sarah just as they had. "They thought you were throwing your life away. I tried to talk to them, David, I really did, but they were stubborn." Lies, every word was a lie. I could feel it in my gut. Mark had never stood up for me in his life. He was the perpetual golden child, the one who basked in our parents' approval while I was the one who always seemed to fall short. He was the pragmatist, I was the dreamer. He chose law, I chose architecture. He fulfilled their expectations, I followed my own path. And now he was the sole heir to their legacy, pretending he wanted to share the spoils of a war he had secretly won. My suspicions solidified a week later. Mark was tasked with clearing out our parents' house, the house we grew up in. He called and asked if there was anything I wanted before he started liquidating the assets. A cold gal term that made my stomach churn. "I know it's hard," he'd said, "but the will is clear. I'm the executor and I have to follow their instructions." Sarah and I drove over that weekend, a sense of dread hanging over us. Walking into my childhood home was like stepping into a museum of a life that was no longer mine. Everything was exactly as it had been, yet it all felt alien. Mark was already there, directing a team from an estate sale company. He had price tags on our mother's antique furniture and our father's collection of first-edition books. He was moving with a chilling efficiency, dismantling our shared history piece by piece. He greeted me with a somber hug. "Tough, isn't it?" he said, gesturing around the room. "But we have to be practical." "Practical?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "You're selling everything, Mark, our whole childhood." "The house needs to be sold, David. I can't maintain two properties. And this is the most efficient way to handle the contents," he explained, as if I were a child who couldn't grasp simple logistics. "Don't worry, I've set aside the family photos for you." His condescension was infuriating. As he was distracted by a call, Sarah and I walked through the house, a painful final tour. In my father's study, a room I was rarely allowed in as a child, I saw his old desk. The top was clear, but I knew he kept important documents in the locked bottom right drawer. On a whim, I pulled the handle. It was locked, as expected. "What are you looking for?" Sarah asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted. "Something, anything that explains this." Mark came back into the room, spotting me at the desk. "Looking for something?" he asked, a slight edge to his voice. "I was just looking," I said. "Where's the key to this drawer?" He shrugged a little too casually. "No idea, probably lost years ago. Dad was always misplacing it. It's mostly just old bank statements and stuff anyway, nothing important." His dismissal was too quick. He was lying again. My father was a bank manager. He was meticulous to a fault. He never misplaced anything, especially not keys to important documents. Mark was hiding something. He didn't want me in that desk. We left soon after with only a single box of old photo albums. As we drove away, I watched the house that held all my memories recede in the rearview mirror, now just an asset to be liquidated by my brother. The conversation about the key replayed in my mind. Mark's casual lie was the first crack in his carefully constructed facade. He wasn't just a passive beneficiary of our parents' cruelty. He was an active participant. He had known about the will. He had probably helped them draft it. The thought was sickening, but it fit perfectly. Mark, the lawyer, guiding our parents to legally and officially excise me from the family, ensuring every T was crossed and every I was dotted. That night's sleep was impossible. I kept seeing that flicker of triumph in Mark's eyes at the lawyer's office. I saw him putting price tags on our memories. I heard his smooth, practiced lies over the phone. He wasn't my brother, not anymore. He was a stranger who wore my brother's face, an adversary who had been plotting against me from the shadows. The grief for my parents was still there, but it was now mingled with a cold, hardening anger. They had left me with a legacy of lies, a tangled web of deceit with my brother at its center. They thought their final word was the end of the story, but as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized it was just the beginning. They had left me with nothing, but in doing so, they had given me a strange kind of freedom. I had nothing left to lose, and I would not let them or Mark get away with it. I needed to find the truth, and I had a feeling the key to it all was locked in that desk drawer. The key, the thought of it consumed me. Mark's deliberate lie about it was a beacon in the fog of my grief and anger. It was a starting point, the first solid piece of a puzzle I was determined to solve. If Mark didn't want me in that drawer, it meant there was something in there he didn't want me to see. My first thought was to simply break it open, but that was too crude. Mark was a lawyer. He would accuse me of breaking and entering, of trying to steal from the estate he now controlled. I had to be smarter than that. I had to think like an architect. I needed a plan, a blueprint. My first call was to my Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister. She and my mom had been close, but she always had a soft spot for me, often remarking that I had my grandfather's artistic streak, much to my parents' chagrin. She had been as shocked as I was about the will. "It makes no sense, David," she said over the phone, her voice crackling with indignation. "Your mother loved you, she was difficult, and your father was as stubborn as a mule, but to cut you out, it feels wrong." "I think Mark was involved," I said, testing the waters. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mark has always been ambitious," she said carefully, "and he always knew how to manage your parents. He told them what they wanted to hear." I took a breath and asked the question that had been burning in my mind. "Aunt Carol, do you remember Dad ever talking about a spare key for his desk, the one in the study?" She was silent for a moment, thinking. "Oh heavens, that old thing, he was so protective of that desk." "Let me think. Yes, I do. Your mother mentioned it once years ago. She was laughing about it. She said Robert was so paranoid he had a duplicate key made and he hid it somewhere only he would think of. He said it was his failsafe." My heart leaped. "Did she say where?" "She did," Carol said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "She thought it was the most ridiculous thing. He taped it to the back of his old university degree, the one hanging on the wall behind the desk. He said no one ever looks at the back of a framed diploma. It was perfect. It was exactly the kind of clever, overly cautious thing my father would do. Mark, in his haste to liquidate everything, would have seen a dusty old frame on the wall and put a $10 sticker on it. He would never have thought to look behind it. The next hurdle was getting back into the house. The estate sale was scheduled for the upcoming weekend. It was my only chance. I told Sarah the plan. She was nervous, her brow furrowed with worry. "David, what if Mark is there? What if he catches you?" "He'll be there, but he'll be distracted," I countered, my mind racing. "He'll be playing the role of the grieving son and dutiful executor, schmoozing with the buyers. The study is at the back of the house. I just need a few minutes alone in there." She looked at me, her photographer's eye seeing the new, hard resolve in my face. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "I'll help. I'll create a distraction." The day of the estate sale was gray and overcast, matching my mood. The house was swarming with strangers, people picking through the remnants of my life like vultures. I saw Mark near the entrance, dressed in a somber navy suit, pointing out the value of a silver tea set to an elderly couple. He looked up and saw me, a brief flash of annoyance crossing his face before being replaced with his mask of sorrow. "David, I'm surprised to see you here," he said, walking over. "I thought this might be too painful." "I wanted to walk through one last time," I said, my voice steady. "And Sarah wanted to see if Mom's old camera was for sale." His eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Of course, look around, most of it is already spoken for though." A subtle dig, reminding me that none of it was mine. Sarah gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod and moved toward the living room, where a small crowd had gathered around my mother's grand piano. I made my way to the back of the house, my heart pounding with every step. The study was quiet, thankfully empty. The door was ajar and I slipped inside, closing it almost all the way. My father's diploma hung on the wall just as Aunt Carol had described. It was a large, ornate frame thick with dust. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted it off the hook. I turned it over and there it was. Taped to the cardboard backing with yellowed, brittle tape was a small brass key. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. I quickly pocketed the key and rehung the frame, making sure it was perfectly straight. Just as I turned to the desk, I heard Sarah's voice rise from the other room, followed by a loud, discordant crash of piano keys. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry," she exclaimed. "I seem to have knocked over this vase, it's everywhere." That was my cue. I knew she had created a scene that would draw everyone, including Mark, to the living room. I moved to the desk, inserted the key into the lock of the bottom drawer and turned. It clicked open with a satisfying thud. The drawer was filled with neat stacks of files, just as Mark had said. Old bank statements, mortgage documents for the house, car titles. But underneath them, at the very bottom, was a thick, leather-bound ledger. It was my father's private financial journal. I knew this book. He had meticulously recorded every major financial transaction of his life in it. And tucked inside the ledger was a slim manila envelope with a single word written on the front in my mother's handwriting: David. My breath hitched. I didn't have time to read it there. I grabbed the ledger and the envelope, tucked them under my jacket, and relocked the drawer. I slipped out of the study and made my way through the distracted crowd. Sarah was apologizing profusely to a flustered Mark who was trying to manage the cleanup of a shattered vase. I caught her eye, gave a slight nod, and headed for the door. We met back at the car, my hands shaking as I held the ledger and the envelope. "Oh, did you get it?" she asked, her eyes wide. "I got it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Driving home, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I had found something my parents had hidden, something Mark didn't know about, or worse, did know about and wanted to keep buried. This was it. This was the forgotten clause in my own life story, the piece of the puzzle that could change everything. The truth was in my hands. Now I just had to find the courage to face it. Back in the safety of our own home, the silence was a heavy blanket. Sarah made us tea while I sat at our dining table, the leather-bound ledger and the manila envelope lying in front of me like artifacts from a forgotten tomb. My hands were still trembling slightly as I reached for the envelope first. My mother's elegant cursive spelling out my name felt like a message from beyond the grave. With a deep breath, I broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. It was a letter, written in my mother's hand, dated just a few days after my wedding to Sarah. "My dearest David," it begins. "If you are reading this, it means your father and I are gone and you have discovered what we have done. I imagine you are feeling hurt and betrayed, and for that I am truly sorry. Please know that this was not my wish. Your father, he can be a man of such rigid principles. He saw your marriage to Sarah not as an act of love, but as a rebellion against everything he believed he had built. He was hurt, and in his hurt he became cruel. He came to me with the idea of changing the will to teach you a lesson," as he put it. I fought him on it, David. For weeks I tried to make him see reason. I told him he was letting his pride destroy our family, but he enlisted Mark in his cause. Mark, your brother, helped him draw up the new will. He told your father it was the only way to protect the family assets from what he called your unstable lifestyle. He fed your father's fears, validated his anger, and helped him craft the very words that I'm sure have torn you apart. They presented a united front, and I was weak. I went along with it, and it is the greatest regret of my life. Tears streamed down my face as I read the words. It was a confession. It confirmed my darkest suspicions about Mark. He wasn't just a bystander, he was an architect of my disinheritance. My mother's weakness was a bitter pill to swallow, but her regret felt genuine, but the letter wasn't finished. But I could not leave you with nothing. I could not let their pride be our family's final legacy. Your father, for all his rigidity, was also a man of his word. Years ago, before all this trouble, we set up a trust for you and Mark. It was an irrevocable trust, established with a significant portion of our early savings to ensure you both had a foundation for your futures, independent of our main estate. Your father agreed to it and signed the documents. It cannot be undone by any will. Mark knows about his own trust, but we never told either of you about the others. Your father intended to give you the documents on your 35th birthday, but after the wedding, he buried them both literally and figuratively. He hid your trust documents and chose to forget they ever existed. Mark, I am certain, does not know about your half. The details, the account numbers, the name of the managing firm, your father recorded it all in his private ledger. He was too meticulous to leave such a thing to memory. Look for the entry on your 10th birthday. That was the day we signed the papers. David, this is your birthright. It is not a handout. It is the legacy I fought to preserve for you. Use it to build a life so full of happiness and love that it renders your father's anger and my weakness utterly meaningless. With all my love, Mom. I dropped the letter, my body shaking with a flood of conflicting emotions. Relief, anger, vindication, and a renewed wave of grief for the mother I now understood in a completely new way. She had left me a map. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her hand resting on my shoulder. I couldn't speak, I just handed her the letter. I watched her face as she read it, her expression shifting from confusion to shock and finally to a fierce protective anger on my behalf. When she finished, she looked at me, her eyes blazing. "David, this changes everything." I picked up the heavy ledger. It felt different now, no longer a relic of the past, but a key to my future. I flipped through the brittle pages, my father's precise, slanted handwriting filling every line. He recorded everything: the down payment on their first house, the cost of our family vacations, the purchase of his first new car. I found the section from the year I turned 10, and there it was, an entry dated on my birthday. Established Patterson Sons Irrevocable Trust. Initial deposit, $250,000, split into two separate equal accounts. Act 785A for Mark, Act 785B for David, Mana. Jed by Sterling Thorne Investments. Annual contributions made. Documents held in Safety Deposit Box, City Central Bank, Box 412. My breath caught in my chest. $250,000 deposited over 2 decades ago. With annual contributions and compound interest, the amount had to be staggering. This wasn't a small savings account. This was a fortune. A life-changing sum of money that my father had hidden and my brother knew nothing about. A cold, clear certainty settled over me. This was my ammunition. Mark had schemed with my father to take everything from me, to leave me with a single insulting dollar. He was currently liquidating my childhood home and preparing to inherit an estate worth millions, all while feeding me lies about wanting to make things right. He thought he had won. He thought he had all the power, but he was operating with incomplete information. My mother's love and my father's obsessive record-keeping had left behind a secret weapon. The plan began to form in my mind, not as a vague desire for revenge, but as a detailed blueprint. I would not just claim my trust. I would use it to turn the tables on Mark so completely that he would never recover. I would use the very tools he and my father valued most: money, status, and the law, against him. "We need to go to the bank," I said to Sarah, my voice low and steady. "And then I need to find a very, very good lawyer, not just any lawyer, a shark." Sarah smiled, a slow, determined smile that mirrored the feeling growing in my own chest. "I think I know just the person," she said. The grief was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface. But for the first time since my parents died, it was overshadowed by something else: purpose. They had tried to write me out of the family story. Now I was going to write my own ending. The next few weeks were a masterclass in covert operations. Sarah connected me with a lawyer named Isabella Rossi, a friend of a friend who had a reputation for being a tenacious litigator specializing in complex financial and estate disputes. She was exactly the shark I needed. When I laid out the story for her in her sleek downtown office, the will, my mother's letter, the ledger entry, her expression was one of intense professional focus. She listened without interruption, her eyes sharp and analytical. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "This is quite the situation, David," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "Your brother and father built a fortress, but your mother left you a secret key. An irrevocable trust is exactly that: irrevocable. It is a separate legal entity from the estate. The will has no power over it." Our first step was to confirm and access the trust. Isabella handled everything. She contacted Sterling Thorne Investments, the firm managing the trust, providing them with the necessary documentation to prove my identity. The confirmation came back within 48 hours. The current value of account 785B was just over $2.3 million. I stared at the number on the email Isabella forwarded to me, feeling a sense of vertigo. It was an astronomical sum, far more than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just a safety net, it was a launch pad, it was freedom, but I pushed the elation down. This wasn't about the money itself, it was about what it could do. It was about justice. With access to the funds secured, Isabella and I began to build our strategy. The plan had two phases. Phase 1 was quiet acquisition. Phase 2 was the public reveal. "Your brother is liquidating the estate," Isabella said, tapping a pen on her legal pad. "He believes he is consolidating his wealth. We're going to use his own actions against him." Mark had put my parents' house on the market. It was a beautiful home in a desirable neighborhood, and he had listed it aggressively, wanting a quick sale. He was also selling off my father's portfolio of stocks and other investments. He was turning everything into cash, a single, massive pile of it that he believed was all his. My plan was precise. I formed a shell corporation, a numbered company with an innocuous name, with Isabella's help. It was completely anonymous, its ownership hidden behind layers of legal paperwork. Through this corporation, I made an offer on my parents' house. Not just any offer, an all-cash offer, 20% above the asking price, with a condition of closing in 10 days. It was an offer no seller in their right mind would refuse. Mark, blinded by greed and his desire for a quick, profitable sale, would never look too closely. He would just see a massive, unexpected windfall. While the real estate deal was in motion, I moved on to the second part of Phase 1. My father, as a bank manager, had been a savvy investor. He held a significant, non-controlling stake in a local, publicly traded construction company, Ridgeline Developments. I knew the company well. They were one of the biggest players in the region. My father had of 10 spoken of it with pride. Mark, as executor, was now selling off that stock in large blocks to avoid spooking the market. Again, through my shell corporation and several different brokers to avoid detection, I started buying. Every share Mark sold, I bought. I didn't just buy his shares, I bought more on the open market. I used a substantial portion of the trust fund to quietly accumulate a massive position in the company. Within 3 weeks, my anonymous corporation had become the single largest shareholder in Ridgeline Developments. I now held more shares than the company's founder. I effectively controlled it. During this time, I maintained complete radio silence with Mark. He called a few times, leaving voicemails filled with his usual fake concern. "Hey Dave, just checking in. The house sold, you won't believe the offer I got. Things are moving along, hope you're doing okay." He sounded smug, thrilled with his own efficiency and the fortune he was amassing. He had no idea he was selling his legacy directly to me. The final piece of the blueprint was the timing. The closing on the house was scheduled for a Friday. The next Ridgeline Developments board meeting was the following Monday. I planned to make my move then. Everything had to be perfectly synchronized. The day the house sale closed, Isabella received the confirmation. My shell corporation was now the official owner of my childhood home. The money, a grossly inflated sum, my money, was now sitting in the estate's bank account, an account Mark controlled. For now. That evening, Sarah and I sat in our living room. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her expression a mix of nervousness and excitement. "I am," I said, feeling a calm I hadn't felt in months. "This isn't just about revenge anymore, Sarah. Mark and my father tried to erase me. They tried to say that my life, my choices, our love had no value. They built their entire world around money and status. I'm going to take that world apart piece by piece using their own tools. And then I'm going to build something better in its place." My blueprint was complete. Every line was drawn, every measurement checked. Mark thought he was the master builder, constructing his new empire on the ruins of my life. But he had no idea that the foundation he was standing on was hollow, and I was about to pull the lever that would send it all crashing down. Monday was coming. Judgment Day was coming. The boardroom at Ridgeline Developments was exactly as I had imagined. A long, imposing table of dark wood, high-backed leather chairs, and a panoramic window overlooking the city. The board members, a collection of stern-looking men and one woman in their late 50s and 60s, were seated, murmuring amongst themselves. They were all waiting for the meeting to begin, unaware that the agenda was about to be completely upended. I had arranged, through my lawyers, to be added to the agenda at the last minute as the representative of the company's new majority shareholder. My name was not used. I was listed only as representative for Keystone Holdings, Inc., the bland, anonymous name of my shell corporation. The door opened and Mark walked in. He wasn't a board member, but as the son of a major former shareholder, he had been invited to attend, a courtesy extended to him by the CEO, a man who had been a friend of our father. Mark looked confident, wearing an expensive suit and a self-satisfied smile. He was there to be recognized, to network, to step into the shoes our father had left behind. He saw me sitting at the far end of the table and his smile faltered. A look of pure confusion washed over his face. "David," he said, his voice a surprised whisper, "what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, the CEO, a man named Mr. Thompson, called the meeting to order. "Let's begin. We have a full agenda, but first, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Mark Patterson. Mark, on behalf of the board, please accept our deepest condolences on the loss of your parents. Your father was a valued friend and a shrewd investor." Mark nodded graciously. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'm honored to be here and to continue my father's legacy." "Indeed," Thompson said. "Now to our first item. We have with us today a representative from Keystone Holdings, Inc., which, as you all know from the memo, has recently become our majority shareholder. Sir, the floor is yours." All eyes turned to me. I stood up slowly, my gaze fixed on my brother. Mark was staring at me, his mouth slightly agape, the pieces visibly clicking into place in his mind with dawning horror. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," I began, my voice clear and steady, resonating in the quiet room. "My name is David Patterson, and as of last week, I am the new controlling shareholder of this company." A collective gasp went through the room. The board members looked from me to Mark and back again, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. Mark's face had gone pale, the color draining from it as if he'd seen a ghost. That's not possible," he stammered. "The estate held those shares, I sold them." "Yes, you did," I said, a cold calm settling over me. "You sold them to me. You see, while you were busy liquidating my father's legacy, you failed to do your due diligence. You were so eager to cash out that you didn't bother to find out who was on the other side of the trade." I let that sink in before continuing. "But that's not the only recent transaction of yours I've been involved in. The family home. You must have been thrilled with that above-asking, all-cash offer. It was just too good to be true, wasn't it? Well, you sold that to me too." Mark was speechless. He looked like he had been physically struck. He was shaking his head in disbelief, unable to process the reality of what was happening. I turned my attention to the rest of the board. My father, Robert Patterson, may have been a shrewd investor, but in his personal life, his judgment was deeply flawed. In his final act, he and my brother conspired to write me out of the family will, leaving me with nothing but a single dollar. They did this because they disapproved of my wife, of my career, of the life I had chosen to build for myself. I paused, looking directly at Mark again, my voice dropping to an icy tone. He did all this while believing he was inheriting everything. He believed he was cementing his position as the chosen son, the heir to the Patterson legacy. What he didn't know, and what our father chose to forget, was that my parents had established an irrevocable trust for me years ago. A trust he couldn't touch. A trust that gave me the power to undo every single thing he has done. The silence in the room was absolute. Mark was white as a sheet, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him in real time. "So as my first act as the majority shareholder of Ridgeline Developments," I announced, my voice ringing with authority, "I am calling for a vote of no confidence in the current leadership and proposing a new strategic direction, one that focuses on community-oriented projects and sustainable design, my vision, not my father's. And as the new owner of the Patterson family home, I will be serving my brother with an eviction notice effective immediately. He will have 30 days to vacate my property." Mark finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate cry. "You can't do this." "I already have," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "You built your future on a foundation of lies and greed, Mark. You helped turn our father's grief and pride into a weapon to hurt me. You stood by and let them disown me, all for money. Well, now you have the money from the sale of the estate, and I have everything else, everything that ever mattered. The house, Dad's company, our legacy, it's all mine." I looked at Mr. Thompson and the stunned board members. "We have a lot of work to do. My team will be in touch tomorrow to begin the transition." With that, I turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the wreckage of my brother's life. I didn't look back. As I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, I didn't feel the euphoric rush of victory I had expected. Instead, I felt a quiet, profound sense of justice. It wasn't about destroying my brother, it was about reclaiming my own story. He and my father had tried to define me by their judgment, to reduce my worth to a single dollar, but they had failed. I was the architect of my own life, and I had just laid the cornerstone for a new foundation, one built not on their bitter legacy, but on my own terms. The aftermath of the board meeting was swift and decisive. News of the hostile takeover of Ridgeline Developments by a previously unknown majority shareholder sent ripples through the local business community. When the identity of that shareholder was revealed to be the disinherited son of the former investor, the story became legendary. The eviction notice was served to mark the next day. According to my lawyer, he didn't say a word. He simply took the papers, his face a blank mask of defeat. He tried to fight it, of course. He hired a team of expensive lawyers to challenge my claim to the trust, arguing that my father had intended to dissolve it and that my mother's letter was inadmissible. But an irrevocable trust is a legal fortress. After weeks of posturing and threats, his lawyers advised him that he had no case. He had been thoroughly and completely outmaneuvered. True to his word, he was out of the house in 30 days. I hired a cleaning crew to purge the place of his presence, and when I walked through the doors for the first time as its owner, the house felt quiet and still. It was empty of furniture but full of ghosts. For a moment, standing in the living room where my father used to read the paper and my mother used to play the piano, the weight of it all hit me. The anger had been a powerful fuel. But now that the fight was over, the grief returned. I grieved for the parents I thought I had, for the brother I had lost long before he betrayed me, and for the childhood that now felt tainted by secrets and resentment. Sarah found me there, standing in the silence. She came and wrapped her arms around my waist from behind, resting her head on my back. "It's okay to be sad," she whispered. "You won, but you lost a lot to get here." She was right. Revenge was a hollow victory if it was the final destination. It had to be a beginning, not an end. We decided not to move into the house. The memories were too complicated, the foundation too fractured. Instead, I made a decision that felt like the first true step toward building my own legacy. I turned the house over to a local charity that provided transitional housing for families in need. The Patterson House, as they decided to call it, would become a place of new beginnings, a shelter built on the ashes of my family's dysfunction. It was a better use for it than a monument to my pain. At Ridgeline Developments, I began to implement the changes I had promised. I brought my own team in, architects and urban planners who shared my vision of building not just structures but communities. We shifted the company's focus from luxury condos to innovative, mixed-income housing projects and green public spaces. It was a risk, and some of the old guard on the board were skeptical, but the energy was undeniable. I was finally able to merge my profession as an architect with the resources to bring my biggest ideas to life. I was building something real, something that would last. As for Mark, he disappeared from my life. With the millions he had made from the estate sale, a fortune that now felt like a severance package, he moved away. I heard through the grapevine that he had joined a law firm in another state, attempting to start over. I felt no satisfaction in his exile, only a quiet pity. He had gotten exactly what he thought he wanted, a life defined by money, and in the process he had lost everything else. He was rich, but he was utterly alone. A year after the will reading, Sarah and I sat on the porch of our own home, the one we had designed and built together, watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with a message from Aunt Carol. It was a photo of the dedication ceremony for the Patterson house with a happy family standing on the front steps. "Your mom would be so proud," the message read. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. The anger was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. My parents' final act, born of pride and disappointment, had been meant to destroy me. My brother's betrayal was meant to secure his own future at the expense of mine. But they had all underestimated one thing: the strength of a foundation built on love and authenticity. They had left me with $1, but my mother had left me a blueprint. I had survived the demolition of my past, and from the rubble, I was building a future that was truly, unshakably my own. The best revenge, I had learned, wasn't destruction. It was building a life so magnificent that the betrayal that started it all became nothing more than a footnote in a much greater story.